Everyone has a story to tell. Welcome to DingoTalk, where we explore the experiences that make us who we are. Here's your host, Carlo Guadagnino.
What's going on, Chuckleheads? I am Carlo Guadagnino. This is DingoTalk, and once again, we jump back into the Division III field, this time with Commissioner of the OAC, Sarah Otey. Sarah's going to talk to us about, one, what it's like to be the first woman commissioner in the OAC, two, only the second full-time commissioner of the OAC, and to just talk about her journey from Washington and Lee to working for the NCAA to now basically being in charge of an entire conference in the Division III realm, and what the importance of Division III is across the board. We're also going to talk a little bit of NIL deals. We're going to talk about what the ever-changing landscape of the NCAA and collegiate fields are. But it's not my job to tell her story. It's Sarah's job to tell her story. If you're watching us on YouTube, really appreciate you. Hit that like button. Maybe subscribe so you don't miss an episode. If you're listening to us on anywhere you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, the whole gambit, hit the like button, hit that little bell so you don't miss an episode. And if you want to follow us on the social medias, it's TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. The only one different is the Instagram page. It's dingo_talk. And we want to take this time to thank everybody, including Commissioner Otey, for joining us, both from the OAC, the PAC, the Empire 8, and the other conferences that have, specifically in the football realm, that have joined up for this season of Dingo Talk. But without further ado, Commissioner Otey is going to tell her story.
What's going on, Chuckleheads? I am Carlo Guadagnino. This is Dingo Talk. My guest this week is the Commissioner of the OAC, Sarah Otey. Sarah, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We're going to do this the same way we do every week. I'm going to take you back to 2003 and find out why William and Lee was your choice and work our way to today. So starting off, and that's Washington and Lee, not William and Lee, so I'll correct myself there. So why was Washington and Lee your choice for undergrad?
You know, it's funny. My dad went to Washington and Lee, and growing up, I wouldn't even visit there because I refused to go to the school that he went to. I already went to his high school. And I was not going to follow in his footsteps to go to Washington and Lee. But as it got time to actually start looking at colleges, and I looked first primarily at the academic profile of the schools I was applying to. W&L fit really well with what I was looking for, and relevant to your podcast, I think. The opportunity to play basketball was something that jumped out at me as something that would be an opportunity there that wasn't at some of the bigger schools that I was looking at. And so the combination of the academic profile of the institution and just the chance to continue my athletic career was what ultimately got me there.
Well, and academics is clearly a strong suit, something very important to you as you graduated from Washington and Lee with magna cum laude. With a psychology degree. Now, why was psych where you went?
Honestly, I was a failed pre-med person, so psych was just the next best thing that allowed me to sort of stay in the sciences, but actually pass my classes. But no, so I really liked, my focus in psychology was actually sport and exercise psychology. So psychology gave me a touch with the sciences, a little bit of neuroscience in there as well, but allowed me to kind of put my foot in the door in terms of working in sport in some degree.
And was that always the goal, was to work in sport in some aspect once the playing career was done?
I wish I could say I had a goal of a specific career when I was coming out of high school, but as I got into my basketball career at Washington and Lee and started to get exposure to some folks in the athletic department and started to see the opportunities that existed in athletics that I didn't previously realize even were jobs. I realized, hey, I'm having a really great experience, a life-changing experience as a student athlete. In some way, I want to be involved in that when I finish school. And was lucky enough to have a mentor in the psychology department at W&L that sort of saw that passion in me, saw my interest, and helped me cater my course selections and even create some independent studies that gave me access to sport and exercise psychology, which wasn't actually a course that Washington and Lee offered. We took a sort of a social psychology approach and layered sport into that.
Now, in between 2003 and 2007, sports psychology was still kind of in its infancy for what we know it as today, correct?
Yeah, it really was. I mean, and that was bad in the sense that there weren't a lot of course. I mean, again, there wasn't a course that I could take as part of my undergrad, but it was good in that there were so many possibilities and so many potential angles that I could use to take it.
Now, when you graduate from there, why the decision to go to Virginia and further your education?
Yeah, well, I think the running joke among psych majors is that you're pretty much signing up for a decision on what your next degree is going to be. But Virginia, similarly, Virginia offered me the opportunity to get a degree in the Curry School at the University of Virginia. I grew up, fully transparently, I grew up a huge Virginia basketball fan for my entire life. So going to Virginia was really cool, cherry on top of my academic career for me. But I was able to work with Diane Whaley, who's a professor there in the Curry School at Virginia, and did some sport and exercise psychology work. And so while they didn't have a degree in sport and exercise psych at that point in time, I did my master's thesis on a sport and exercise psychology topic, and again was able to just kind of create my own academic curriculum, I guess, a little bit.
Which make it a little nicer to be able to kind of like, I want to do that class, I want to do that class. No, I don't need the math stuff. You can leave that over there. And
yeah, exactly.
I don't know, maybe you're a math person, because I don't do the math. I stay away from it.
I'm not. I did stats just because I had to.
I understand that. I stay as far, if I can avoid the math, I do. So from 2010 to 2012, you were the assistant athletic director at Hollins University. And I guess my question is, why go into that route of athletics? You know, you're now working up into, kind of skipped over the sports information director position, athletic training, and you kind of leapfrogged into one of the top positions at a school. Why that decision?
A little bit of pure dumb luck. So as I was finishing my degree at Virginia, there was a position that opened up at Hollins that technically the title was assistant athletic director, but it was actually a position funded by a grant from the NCAA. So the NCAA gives grants, Division III specifically gives grants to sort of under-resourced institutions to hire a position on their campus that they've not previously had or that they wouldn't be able to afford without the NCAA money. So Hollins had never previously had an assistant AD. And because it was grant funded, it was maybe not quite as salary competitive as some other assistant AD positions would be. So I got lucky that they were looking for somebody with my level of experience, or maybe inexperience, I should say. And Hollins is in the Old Dominion Athletic Conference, which is the conference that I played in as a student athlete. So I had some connections that helped me out for sure.
Now, what was that experience like? So you're going into a job kind of, I guess on both sides, like you said, they don't really have much in way of expectation because they don't really know what they're looking for. And you don't have much of an expectation in the sense that, like you said, you kind of dumb luck and this job came along. So what was the experience like for those 2 years?
It was incredible. I mean, the really cool thing about Division III, especially on campus, is that whether you like it or not, you're doing a little bit of everything. So I used sort of my exercise science degree, and I did some strength and conditioning. I was an assistant basketball coach. I did compliance. And the really cool thing about that experience was I got to do a little bit of everything in an athletic department and really hone what my interests and skill sets were. And the administrative side just ended up being what I felt like I was the best at, where I felt I could contribute the most to the industry, and the stuff that I enjoyed the most as well. And then I'll tell you a little story. I was there for 9 or 10 months, and the athletic director that hired me announced she was leaving. And so they weren't going to hire a new AD until July. So that meant I think I was 23, 24 years old, and I was the interim athletic director for like 5 months. I did year-end evaluations of all of the coaches, did the year-end budget, and it was like, who knows? Please, nobody ever go back and look at any of the paperwork from in the
No
spring
fact checking, no nothing.
2011.
We're not going back
Yeah.
into the record books. We're just
No telling, yeah. But NCAA enforcement should not go on campus there and see what happened. I have no idea.
Now, before we jump into your position as commissioner, I want to talk a little bit about, specifically, we're recording this during Division III week.
Yeah.
Let's start there. What is the importance of Division III, both on an academic side and on the athletic side?
Yeah, I mean, you hear it all the time, and I think Division III is what the NCAA strives to be holistically, right? The balance between the student experience and the athlete experience is, in my opinion, it was the right balance for me. Maybe it's not right for everybody, but it was the right balance for me, and it's an experience that I've made a career out of trying to provide to other student athletes. It really just allows a student to continue playing a sport because they love playing a sport. And honestly, it's very high level athletics. And we can talk about that certainly, but I couldn't beat any of our current OAC student athletes in anything ever. I mean, they're phenomenal athletes. But also allows them to have leadership opportunities on campus, be in clubs, and just genuinely be a student that also has this passion and commitment to the athletic side of their experience.
Well, and it's interesting you brought up a point, and I have talked to many coaches, OAC, PAC. We're moving into the Empire 8 now. There seems to be this negative connotation around Division III, which you just kind of touched on in a positive light. The athletics isn't as much of a drop-off as everybody thinks.
Yeah.
What have you seen, now being a part of two different conferences, what have you seen athletically? Like you said, I don't think I can go out there and play basketball. I know I can't play football with any of these guys.
Yeah, well, and honestly, that was my experience as a student athlete too, right? I had a really successful high school career and was pretty highly recruited. And I was humbled when I went to play in the ODAC. I mean, you realize very quickly that you're playing against the best high schoolers in the country. I don't know the percentages off the top of my head, but a very, very small percentage of high school athletes go on to play in college at any level. So you're already taking the best of the best, and so in many cases, sure. My case, certainly, I wasn't playing Division I because I wasn't good enough to play Division I. But there are plenty of student athletes that choose Division III just because it's the right balance. But then even those of us that aren't good enough to play Division I, it's still really high caliber athletics.
Now, we've talked to a number of the football coaches from the OAC. Coach Hilbert, I believe, was the one that coined the phrase for the OAC. And bear with me because this is one hell of a tongue twister. The OAC is the SEC of Division III. How do you feel about that? Especially, let's focus specifically in the football realm of the conference for the moment.
Yeah, well, Carla, don't ever tell Coach Hilbert that I agreed with him on something. But yeah, no, I mean, particularly in football, the success of our conference on the national level speaks for itself. One of the things that's been frustrating to me since I took over a year and a half ago is just not having the opportunity to get more than one OAC team into the national tournament, because I think our top 4 or 5 teams would make noise and win games in the national tournament. There are certainly some very good football conferences out there, but I would put ours up against any of them. I really think that the depth of the conference and the success of the student athletes speaks for itself.
Well, and as we've been kind of corresponding to get this interview set up, I've paid attention to OAC events on Twitter, If I'm not mistaken, there was a basketball team that had one hell of a run this past season from the OAC as well.
That's
what
right.
was that
Yeah,
experience like?
That was awesome to see the Mount Union men's basketball team make the Final Four. And actually, I was at the men's Final Four last year with the Marietta men's basketball team. So we had two different men's basketball teams in the Final Four 2 years in a row. And this year, Mount Union losing on a heartbreaker at the buzzer in the national championship game. That could have been anybody's game. They had an incredible season. And then we had, a women's basketball team that made the Sweet 16 for the first time ever, and then another women's basketball team in the Sweet 16 also. You're gonna regret asking this question, but I mean, we have had top 5 finisher in women's track and field, top 3 in wrestling. I think top 5 in men's cross country. It's an incredible conference. It's really fun to look at the national standings in any given sport on any given week and see one of my schools represented.
Well, and you touched on it a little bit earlier. You took over about a year and a half ago. Why was this the right fit for you?
So when after I left Hollins, I went and worked at the NCAA for 8.5, 9 years in a variety of capacities. But one of my early roles at the NCAA was, hang on, I'm going to fix my lighting here, Carla.
Oh, good.
Getting a weird glare on myself in the sun. I took one of my early roles at the NCAA was serving as a conference contact. So serving as kind of the liaison between the NCAA and a couple of Division III conferences. And the OAC was one of my conferences, back in like 2012, 2013. And so I got to know the history of some of the institutions in the OAC through that experience, got to know my predecessor, Tim Gleason, through that relationship, and just really grew to respect the competitiveness of the OAC and what this conference does, particularly with all 10 schools being in the same state. I think that's fairly unique. And so then when the job opened up, I saw Tim was leaving. I had some conversations with people in the conference that I knew and trusted. And what I really liked about what the presidents told me through that process was I really appreciated the pride in where the conference is now and how competitive we are now, but also the commitment to continue to reach some of our untapped potential. So I love a challenge. And so that's what we're working on now.
Now take us through a day or a week in the life of a commissioner of a Division III conference.
I have no idea. It really depends. I mean, you'll hear a lot of people say that depending on the job, but I kind of put my job into a couple of different buckets, and I'm not working on every single bucket every single day. It really depends on the time of year. The thing that I think is my skill set, the thing that comes most naturally to me is I call it governance work. But so taking the athletic directors or a coaches group or the presidents of the conference and getting them in the same room and talking about strategy, policy, how to position the conference, how to platform the conference, how to have national influence. So some of those big picture conversations are types of things that I worked on when I was at the NCAA. So that part of the transition has been easy for me. But then there's like assigning officials, working with officials coordinators and making sure our games have officials, working with the commissioners of the other D3 conferences to talk legislative big picture for the NCAA and what can we as conferences do to help advance that. And then, of course, just putting on great championship events for our student athletes so that they feel like they've got a meaningful season culminating experience.
Well, and it's interesting you bring up other conferences, specifically the commissioners. Last year around this time, I had Commissioner Underko from the PAC on, and that was right around the NIL stuff was really starting to ramp up. At the Division III level, now are we a year into the NILs being like?
I think it's almost 2, yeah.
What has changed at the Division III level and has NIL become what it is at the Division I and Division II level, or is it kind of staying depending on where you are and the area that you're in?
Yeah, I think it depends a little bit. I don't think it's grown as quickly at the Division III level as it has at the Division I level. And that makes sense, both because of unfortunately, I mean, I wish our student athletes had more TV airtime. So thanks for you for what you do and helping them get that. But it's a little bit just them not having as much exposure as Division I athletes, and then also our athletic departments being understaffed comparatively and not quite able to spend as much dedicated time walking students through that process. But I do think that it has created opportunities for student athletes at all levels. And maybe even most meaningful in Division III, it's just released some of those restrictions that historically didn't make a ton of sense in Division III, to prevent a Division III student athlete from financially benefiting from things that they were going to do out in the community. And so I think it's a positive. I think the change is a positive. Obviously, it's a challenge for some conferences that cross state lines, that the state laws around NIL vary from state to state. We're fortunate in that all 10 of our schools are in Ohio. But that's created some challenges. And I think there's a lot more progress that will be made in Division III. Even some of our schools are slowly starting to partner with organizations that are devoted to helping their student athletes find those resources and maximize their NIL opportunities.
And my follow-up to that is same question I asked him a year ago. Do you think that eventually in the Division III level, we will see either scholarships come down or some type of different aid aimed more towards the student athlete? Or is that, like you said, one of the things that the NCAA kind of looks at Division III and goes, oh, maybe we shouldn't touch this. We've kind of left this alone in its bubble. Let's leave it there.
Yeah, I mean, I think so far the rhetoric from the Division III membership, who again the membership makes the rules, so it's not necessarily the NCAA office sitting there deciding what the restrictions are going to be. But the rhetoric from the Division III athletic directors so far has been that opening up the financial aid legislation would be counter to the philosophy of Division III. Now, I will say, I do think there's a working group right now that's reviewing the Division III philosophy. So maybe we'll know more in 6 months or so. If that piece of if that sort of philosophical tenet makes any movement, then perhaps there's a window there. But if you were to ask me today, short of federal or state legislation that requires Division III to do something different, I wouldn't see athletic scholarships becoming a thing. But I do think there are ways Division III can move the needle and make more financial resources available to our student athletes, or just free them up to pursue some of those things on their own to make college more cost efficient for them, while stopping short of going all the way to athletic scholarships.
Now, so from 2003 to now, what's the biggest change you've seen in college sports?
NIL is a pretty big one. Trying to think. You know what? Another recent one that I think is going to be really interesting is sports wagering. So when I first started at the NCAA, sports wagering, I mean, it still is prohibited by NCAA legislation, but it was easy to prohibit it through NCAA legislation because of the federal laws surrounding sports wagering activity. And now that that's opened up, the NCAA cannot any longer not go to states that have legalized sports wagering activities. That, you know, previously they wouldn't go play a tournament in Vegas because it was contrary to their philosophy. And so that's changed. That landscape's changed. It's opened up the geography a little bit more. And now, I mean, gosh, if you watch ESPN leading into a big Division I game in really any sport, they're talking about betting lines. And so it's changed the way people talk about sport, I think.
I agree. I think we've seen that really that needle gets pushed further and further as we kind of get through and with NIL coming in as well, there's just a lot of, well, I would say that there's a lot more conversation about the money lines and the spreads than as growing up, as I remember whatever being talked about.
Yeah, exactly.
So these next 5 questions are, they're just completely random. I've asked every other guest that we've had. So we're going to hit you with them. If you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be and why?
If I could live anywhere in the world, Bald Head Island. It's like a tiny little island off the coast of Wilmington, North Carolina. We went there a lot growing up, and no cars are allowed, so it's just golf carts and bikes, and physical activity and the beach. That sounds pretty good to me.
What is the most important lesson that you've learned thus far over your career?
The most important, it's kind of boring, and I tell students this, and they I think they're disappointed in my answer, but bust your tail where you are. I mean, work as hard as you can in the role that you're in. That's the best way to get the next role, is to be great in the one that you've got.
If you weren't in your current occupation, what would you be doing and why?
I would probably be a national park ranger. I really like being outside. I like hiking. I like physical activity. So I don't know, in the mountains somewhere as a national park ranger, maybe.
Best compliment you've ever received?
Best compliment I've ever received. Oh man. I don't know. I guess the best compliment I've ever received is that I remind someone of my dad.
Okay. Now, on the other side of that, best insult you've ever received?
How much time do you have? All right, so I'll throw some. One of my athletic directors gave me an underhanded insult a few weeks ago. I posted a photo on Twitter because Washington and Lee, my alma mater, was playing. They didn't play one of my schools, but they played at Ohio Northern in the first round of the women's basketball championship. And so I posted a photo of my playing days, and Larry Heiser, who's the athletic director at Marietta, said that he didn't know that YWNL wore their uniforms on practice days, sort of insinuating that I never got to play in games, which he's not that far off, but yeah.
Okay, well, it was very creative the way he said.
Yeah.
That was a nice, I mean, not a nice backdoor, but it was a nice. Now, you're only the second full-time commissioner in OAC history, first woman, obviously. What does that mean to you?
So I've grown more to appreciate how meaningful that is. I'm someone, it's interesting, right? We're in the 50th, we're in kind of a year-long celebration of the 50th anniversary of Title IX. And I get asked a lot what it's like to be a female in athletics administration. And I've been incredibly fortunate in my life to never feel like I had any doors entirely closed to me because of my gender. And over the course of time, I've grown to appreciate that means how much it means that there were people that came before me that made sure that was the case. So as I think about being the first female, and the fact that doesn't seem that big of a deal to me is a big deal, because it means that somebody came before me and made sure that I had room to grow into that role.
And then just briefly, can you give us a little bit of a synopsis for those that don't know what Title IX really is? Because I think a lot of people just assume like Title IX is if men are practicing at this time, women have to be given the same amount of time and the same uniforms, the same opportunities. But then there's all this other stuff that gets kind of bulked in with Title IX. So can you explain that to us?
Yeah, and I'm certainly not a Title IX expert, but the premise of Title IX is that it was a bill that precluded gender discrimination in the educational context. So any institution that received any type of federal funding, which is almost all of them, could no longer discriminate based on gender in any capacity. So it's really an educational law, and it applies to much more than just sport. But the way it plays out in sport is just ensuring that the interests and the interests of the student body and the prospective student body are equally met for both genders. So you're right. I mean, you hear people talk about roster sizes, right? Making sure there are approximately the same number of female student athletes as male student athletes, that the locker rooms look similar, those types of things. But all of that is really just getting to the core of ensuring that an institution's not discriminating or not drawing arbitrary lines based on gender. And there are a couple of different ways schools can comply with that. The numbers don't have to be exactly equal. It just kind of has to match the interests of their student body and their prospective student body. But yeah, it's I would be getting way outside of my area of expertise if I tried to talk too much more about it.
Well, and I think the NCAA kind of had that realization, or maybe you're going to have that realization over this now summer, given the women's tournament versus the men's tournament and the very big disproportionate to the men's side to the women's side. The last question, and this one, it confuses every guest that I have. It confused me when I wrote it down, but I keep rolling with it because it keeps the continuity of the show. Was there a question you were expecting me to ask? And if so, how would you have answered it?
So a question that I get asked a lot, especially knowing that you have talked to a number of our football coaches, is what it's like being a female who's never played football, with some responsibility over football, and for Division III, very competitive, nationally competitive football. And I guess how I would have answered it is that I'm very fortunate in our conference that we've got 10 phenomenal coaches who are willing to look to a female as the leader of the conference and are willing to support me. And actually, they're one of our most supportive coaches committees. And then at the end of the day, so much of my job is just all about relationships. And so the people that I'm around in the OAC make it really easy for me. And I'm very fortunate to be a part of it.
Well, Commissioner Otey, that's that. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your week to sit down with us. I'm glad we could get this done this time. There's a couple cancellations in there and whatnot. For those of you sticking around, we are going to take a break. We'll be right back with the editorial with Serenity Brown, where she tells me all the things I did wrong. But I corrected myself at the beginning with my glaring mistake. So she can't call me out on that one because she'll have my notes. But again, I want to say thank you very much for joining us. And you never know, you might see us around. We have a couple games scheduled. We're supposed to go to a couple OAC games. We're supposed to go to a couple PAC games. I might make my way to New York for the Empire 8. That conference it's like the wilderness to me. I don't know. I didn't even know it was there. And now I'm talking to all these coaches. The OAC, really, I feel bad because I thought it was Mount Union, John Carroll, and there was a bunch of schools that were very competitive and they were kind of that next level. Take the time to look through the stats and everything. There's not very much disparity from the top to the bottom of the conference. I mean, you have, and the coaches have said it, if you don't bring your A game on a Saturday, specifically because we've talked to the football coaches, if you don't bring your game, you will get beat. That's top to bottom in the conference. So I hope to see you at some point this fall, and we'll be right back, Chuckleheads.
What's going on, Chuckleheads? I am Carlo Guadagnino. This is Dingo Talk. Actually, this is the editorial with Serenity Brown. It's still Dingo Talk. I just should introduce the show before we go any further with this, what's already starting off to be a solid input on this one. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. The only one that's different is Instagram. It's dingo_talk. Thank you for watching. If you're on YouTube, give us a like and a subscribe. Thank you for listening. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, please continue to do that. Hit the notification button so you don't miss any of our episodes. What did you think of Commissioner Otey?
How about we start with you this time? What did you think?
I mean, I think she's a very strong-minded woman who's done a lot of good for women's athletics and athletics as a whole. But also, I think the more opportunities that are presented to OAC schools, this seems to be the right fit to be the second full-time commissioner in conference history. So,
The first one.
and the first woman.
Yeah, that was a good episode.
Mhm.
Like that.
That's it.
Yeah.
Short and sweet this week.
Yeah, you do my job for me because you point out your own mistakes in the show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's this self-deprecating humor thing that they've all taught me. I'm really good at it. I'm excelling in that part. Also, with this being the first episode in May, and I believe May is Mental Health Awareness Month, just make sure you check in on your people. Make sure you check in on yourself. You know, you can do a lot of good for a lot of people, but if you're not taking care of yourself, it'll cause a problem. You can't neglect yourself just to help
Yes.
other people.
I agree.
So make sure you're good. Make sure your people are good. And yeah, I just thought it was important to maybe next week we'll do a
It's
little
very
thing.
important.
It's a very and if you think that you need help, call a friend, call a family member, do something. You know, you're not alone. So that being said, you could live anywhere in the world. Where would it be and why? Oh yeah, you're getting ringered. Here we go. Hey. Go.
Does it have to be a specific place, or can I just describe?
Yes, you can just describe.
Okay.
There was a little hair flip. There was a little hair flip behind that voice. I'm just gonna, I don't know if you could. Okay.
Nowhere near people.
Yeah, I agree.
Off top of the list, warm. Not like to the point where like we're dying.
I like snow.
I hate it.
If we don't have to go anywhere, then I would love it even more.
I hate it. I hate being cold. So warm.
Okay.
I really think that's my.
Those are your two qualifications: no
my-
people and warm. I can make those work. We can make those work.
No.
We'll work that into your next contract for the show. Someplace warm and not near people. So not Morgantown, West Virginia.
No, it's cold as hell this week.
And yeah, I want to point that out. Thank you for reminding me. It's freaking May, and I want to tell you, how hard it was for me to use freaking as the word there. It's freaking May, and it's really cold. So whoever's in charge of the heater, we need to turn that on or pay the bill, do whatever you're supposed to do, but it's not supposed to be, I'm not supposed to be seeing snow on May 1st. Yeah. So that being said, best compliment you ever received?
That I'm stubborn or thick-headed.
Best insult you've ever received?
There's a lot of insults that are running in my head right now.
We were buffering there for a minute.
Yeah, did you see the eye?
For those younger people, don't worry about it. You don't know what that means. We were in dial-up mode for those older folk that are watching.
I've been told before, and I don't think it's true, but I've been told I was selfish before, and I think sometimes that's okay
to be selfish. I agree. So I think we started this series here 2 months ago, and that was because we had you on the last episode of the year, and we asked you a question there, and that question was, if you could have lunch with 3 people. They could be fake people. I don't care if it's Spock, Yoda, and Chewie sitting at the table. Have you come up with 3 people? I gave Star Wars 2 out of the 3 people.
I'm sleeping.
Okay. Well, do you have anything else?
I don't think so. Next week, I'll think of 3 people.
No, you won't. Don't let her lie to you. Next week, we will be... there's a possibility that we'll have an administrator from Bethany College. There's a possibility that we'll be jumping back into the PAC. And there's a possibility that we might be jumping, following Commissioner Otey. We might be staying in the OAC and taking down a couple more of those coaches and getting their stories out there. Haven't decided yet, so stay tuned for that. And all the people graduating from Bethany, congratulations. Go out into the real world, do some great things. And
today it's the Saturday.
Yeah, it's this Saturday, yeah. So go out in the world, do some great things, and we will catch you next week, Chuckleheads.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Dingo Talk. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. For more info and to contact the show, you can find us on Twitter @DingoTalk.